So one area that we're completely different in than all our competitors is the element of data. We've designed our system to be a data system, where essentially all the other systems have been designed to be very efficient with the hardware. So almost the opposite of data systems. So that's one big element that I think our customers should be aware of and say, okay, listen, Silverflow actually is a data system. We can get so much additional data that we couldn't get. The other thing is around simplicity. We've designed our system to be very simple to start working with and also to use on a daily basis. You don't need 2.5 years to go live. Our quickest customers go live in 6 weeks. And you don't need to have 200 people working on your dispute team because we've automated 70% of them. So it's actually simpler than you think it might be. And the third one is, of course, around innovation of products. We innovate very quick, and we can do that because we've got a very modern stack.
Oh, Robert, it's a pleasure having you in the show. Thank you.
Hi, Monica. Thank you for inviting me here. Looking forward to a great conversation.
Likewise. And you must know that this is the very first time that we do a podcast on acquiring. Usually it's on the issuing side or money management side, investment, but first one on acquiring, it makes it a special episode.
Very nice. I hope I can help you understand a little bit more about the world of acquiring in that case.
Yeah. Yes, because it's it's totally different to issue. So it's important to talk about it. So before we go into it, this podcast is all about how can we create more purpose-driven fintechs. So what's your take?
Yeah, I think in general, when it comes to purpose, of course, there are a lot of real-world problems. There are a lot of people who don't have access to modern technology, in particular also in making payments easier. And of course, what you mentioned, most of your podcasts are around issuing, and I saw that's also about financial inclusion in the sense of bank accounts. But of course, if you issue cards, you also need to make sure that people can actually use that card, or if you give somebody a bank account, that they can actually use it to do something with it. And I think that is part of our purpose, to make, let's say, the acceptance of payments across the globe for everybody accessible. And I think that is where we mostly focus on with our product. And we do that, of course, in many markets. But the principle is essentially the same, that if you want to make the use of digital payments bigger, you should focus on the one side, making sure that people have the tools, the credit card or the bank account or the debit card, etc. And on the other side also that they can use it across the globe. And that's where we come in.
Yeah. And what inspired you to focus on building the business as such?
Yeah, I've been in the business for quite some years, since the late 90s. And at some stage then you realize that much of the infrastructure that is used today is actually quite old already. Many of the core tools that are currently used in our space of the fintech world, they actually date back to the 80s, sometimes even to the 70s, sometimes to the 90s. And of course, they've been designed at that moment with all the great stuff in mind. But if you look across the globe and all the innovations that have happened and demand for certain new products, new type of products, we came to the conclusion that most of those platforms are just essentially too old. Yes, you can patch it here and there and make it a little bit better. But if you really want to change the way how consumers can pay to their retailers, and retailers can actually accept those transactions, then essentially the platforms that are there today, they're not suitable for supporting that in the way we think they should. And that's where it comes from. We saw that this market is too complex. Yes, there are players who do what we do, but we think that all those players, they use old technology, and by itself, if it works, if it ain't broken, it works, you could argue. But because it's old technology, it has its effect on a lot of things, on the speed of innovation. These platforms are not easy to innovate. On the actual data that you can use for improving conversion rates, but also, of course, looking at fraud and making things. The cost of these products are quite often very high. And with modern technology, can drive down the cost of working with these type of platforms, making it, again, more accessible for many of our customers.
Yeah, definitely. And then before we go deeper into Silverflow as such, I want to step back and talk more about purpose and impact. So the stats that we have today, they're still shocking. We have that worldwide, over 3/4 of adults are still either unbanked or underbanked. And while I'm of the train of thought that FinTech as we know it today, we've had a ton of impact in the past 10 years. I think we have not had it because the pain point is still there. Like customers still have a ton of stress related to money. Like we said, like there's a ton of underbanked people. And if we continue in this pace, like the pain point keeps getting bigger and the results are not there. So in your opinion, if we were to have 10 times the impact of what we're having now in 5 years time, not in 20, like 5 years time, what could we have to do?
Yeah, I think it depends also a little bit how you look at the world. Huh? So you could make as a measure how many people actually have a bank account. You could measure that, but I'm not sure if that's the right way to measure, because what in many countries where people typically don't have too much bank accounts, they do quite often have a mobile telephone. And quite often on that mobile telephone, a lot of different products are added, whether it be payment products or maybe savings products or micro lending or business type of products. So I think that purely looking at how many people have a bank account, that you're missing a certain part. You should actually more look at how many people have access to modern financial technology in that sense. And a bank account could be part of it, but as far as I'm concerned, if you have other tools like wallets or prepaid cards or lending products, etc., you can work with them even if you don't have a bank account. And that will mean that other companies will take over the role of banks in those countries. The other thing, of course, that you're looking at is how much do people actually have to spend in general. Sometimes it's difficult to manage. Of course, we know that many people don't have access to a lot of money. So that's a fact. That is not something I'm disputing. But it's difficult to measure in a cash-based economy. You could measure that if you look at the digital transaction. So we're looking at the measuring. My view is that if you make it easier for people to pay to each other, consumer, or to pay to businesses, consumer to retailer, C2B, or allow businesses to have more efficient means to pay to each other, that it speeds up all those type of transactions, that you get quicker access to transactions. And I think that ultimately should lead to the growth that we're hoping for. If you make it simpler to make payments, and simpler means cheaper, quicker, lower risk, it will drive the trust of people doing business together because they're guaranteed to get a payment product. And yeah, in my view, that could be an accelerator for any form of business, the speed of money. So people have earlier access to the money, they can invest it earlier, etc. Of course, this is, will this happen in the next 5-10 years? I think we can hope it will be better the next 5 to 10 years for sure. How quickly it will go depends a bit per market, I would say, because we have seen markets where people are essentially bypassing every form of banking infrastructure, immediately moving over to newer type of companies that you actually see that it gives an enormous impact. But there are also countries at the same time where you don't see it that much. And I think it's interesting to see why does it work in some markets and not in all the other markets.
Yeah, that's a beautiful debate on its own. Because it's like infrastructure, there's so many things in there. But what I really liked about what you said, you mentioned the word cash. So we started saying, hey, people with bank accounts, but then it was like, hey, it's only, and it's very like on topic as well, that it's like not only banking people, but like making the payments. And the less cash we have, then that means that people would be onboarded into the digitalization of money, let's say.
Yeah, it is a way of measuring, but there's one thing that sort of makes it a bit complex in some cases, because if you look across the globe, there are many different type of solutions. In many cash-based societies, quite often, if you look, for instance, in many markets in Africa, as an example, if you run a little restaurant, for instance, quite often these people, they don't have the amount available to buy their products for the next month. So they can't go to the big retailer and say, I want to have my cola for the next month and my beers for the next month. So what quite often typically they do, they go early in the morning to the markets. They buy a lot of fresh products. They also have a little bit of cola and beer and drinks and coffee in store because, of course, during the day they sell their products. In the evening as well. What they keep, they probably eat it themselves or for their families. And during the day they make some money, and people typically pay in cash during the day. And where in most Western countries, we don't need that cash of that day to buy our products the next morning because we have a little bit of saving on our bank. But in many of these countries, they actually don't have access to that money. So they actually use the money that they made today to be able to go to the market tomorrow morning and to buy additional fresh products. They quite often don't have the refrigerators and stuff like that. So besides it is a cash economy, they also need to have access to the funds very quickly. They don't have the savings on their bank account or anywhere else that they can say, okay, I'm just going to buy groceries for the next month and put it somewhere in the fridge and it will be okay. So it's a whole different way of thinking. So there will always is very long term, but at this moment, unless there are products that provide, let's say, access to these profits of the day or these revenues of the day, that you can actually use that for tomorrow or a very short time frame. Those are complete different things, different challenges that people have in those markets compared to most of the, let's say, the more developed markets.
Yeah. So basically what you're saying is we want settlement at real time.
Exactly. That's what you get to. If for those markets, and it's very important to have very quick settlement of funds. And then to a degree, it doesn't really matter if it's settled in cash, which of course would be a typical cash transaction when it's settled immediately on the transaction. If it would be cards or other forms of methods, yeah, you want to have access to as quick as possible, but it's more than just having the access to the money on your telephone or whatever. It's also that you're able to actually spend it in real time as well. So that is more, again, on the acceptance side. And that's, of course, where we then Silverflow come back in.
Yeah. And that's where it's a full circle. Exactly. So adding to that, I think if we think long term, the topic that has been coming up lately that didn't used to that much a few years ago is sustainability as such. That's a huge topic on its own. So just to add it to the conversation, like in this context, like what's your definition of sustainability?
Yeah, for companies such as ourselves, it's a very interesting topic, but a difficult topic because we don't use actual resource as such. We use our servers are in the cloud and we buy our electricity from the data center. And yes, we can say we want to have, let's say, green energy and that's what we do, of course. But those are the things you do in sustainability. You can also look at, let's say, your own personal sustainability. So what do you do actually at the office? We have a paperless office. We encourage people to come with public transport or a bike, those type of things. But in the bigger picture, that is our direct impact when it comes to sustainability. And of course, we actively promote people to certain behavior and our own behavior, of course, in terms of how do we consume our energy. But that is probably some of the outlines where we can do that when it comes to sustainability.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a big challenge as well.
If you look at it from the other way, because of the way we deploy our infrastructure, and that is maybe we know that companies who use their own data centers, they always use overcapacity, essentially. So they have more servers in their data center than they need because they need to make sure that during peak times they have sufficient capacity. And it also means that more servers are being built and essentially consume energy and of course consume the resources, etc. We don't have that. So we don't have our own data centers. We share that in cloud infrastructure. So that also from that point of view has a smaller impact because we don't use that overcapacity. We don't build for that overcapacity. We don't install our own data centers. But it's, for companies such as ourselves, it's not something that we don't want to do, but it's very difficult to actually pinpoint the actual impact that you're making. You're making small bits and pieces and you do what you can and you do your best there. And yes, it of course does have impact, but it's not like massively changing from coal industry to solar power for us because we don't consume that much. But we're very aware. We take those measures still what we can do.
Awesome. And then basically to build on not only sustainability, but impact as well. What moves the industry is people, like people within the industry. And we know what makes a great company is their people. And as part of that, it's of course leadership. So we cannot talk about like impact without talking about people, culture, and leadership. So what is your take? I'm especially interested in this one because geographically speaking, culturally speaking, let's say, and this is like totally biased comment, right? So we have, let's say, Latin America, we have Asia, we have the rest of Europe, and then we have the Nordic countries. And then Nordic countries are the ones that are famous for great quality of life and having a good balance and people being happy despite of the weather. You guys are famous for getting that right. And I think the rest of the world, we have a ton to learn on how to do it well and how do we create a culture and leadership style where it does put not only the customer at the center of what we do, but also the employee at the center of what we do, because we're powered by people. So yeah, what are your insights, mindset?
Yeah. I think it's a very interesting question. So this is not particular for Silverflow, but we also do it at Silverflow. But in all fairness, in many of the previous companies that I've worked with or been part of the C-level team, we had the same philosophy that yes, you can build a fantastic company employing all people who are the same as yourself, and we probably will be good in a market that also works in the same environment. So if you want to build a fantastic Dutch company, probably you can do it with fantastic Dutch people. But we've always had the ambition to build a global company. And of course, that's slightly different. If you want to build a global company, you also need to have a team of people that thinks globally. And how does that translate in Silverflow in particular? But to be quite honest, also in many of the previous companies, we have roughly 70 people staff at this moment. And I think we have close to 30 different nationalities in our team.
Oh.
Just to give you an indication how international. And this is not that, let's say that it's all German and Belgium and UK and Nordic, which are pretty close, but it literally ranges all the way from different countries in the APAC region to different countries in the African region to different countries in LATAM region. Of course, we also have people from North America, and yeah, we have quite a number, of course, who actually comes from the Netherlands, being a Dutch company. But as we do this on purpose, we want to build this global company, and that means we also have to have this global appearance. And how do you get that? By having a lot of people in different roles and different functions from different countries. And it creates quite an interesting culture, because we try to recruit the best of the best, of course. That's important as well. We need to have people who know what they're talking about or are eager to learn and with the right passion and enthusiasm for what we do. But if you put this group of people together, then suddenly you realize that it doesn't matter that they actually come from different countries. They have the same passion, the same drive, the same hunger for success. And that creates, I think, a fantastic atmosphere in the company where people really are passionate. And that besides working together here, our team does a lot of things outside of work itself. So they organize their trips to go sporting together, or they have a game night here in the office, or they go out to the bars in Amsterdam together, or to parties and stuff like that. And that's typically these mixed teams as well. So you see that people like that you bring a group of very passionate people together. And yeah, that works very well. And for us, of course, for our customers, it works very well as well, because if we would be working with a customer in whatever country, quite often we bring the native speaker, so to say, because that is the advantage. Yes, you can do much of it in English, but sometimes it helps to build that relation if you use people who know a little bit about domestic language. So that is how we look at our team. And then in terms of who leads teams, who get senior roles, so far we have a very strong conviction that you should get them from the team. So of course you can get people from outside the team as well, but it would not be fair if all the senior positions, and we're still a startup, if all the senior positions would go to people outside the organization. That sort of kills the ambition of many people. So of course not everybody can get a promotion, but what we typically try to do is first look internally. Are there people who can take this next challenge? We can get them out of their comfort zone, give them a little bit more responsibility. And that's how we look, as well as making sure that these people remain motivated. And the last thing maybe is that we also have a very open organization. So as a leadership team, we don't have our own rooms. We're just sitting with the rest. We have our conversations, even if it's about next investment rounds or big customers or pricing discussions, but also when there are things on the IT side, we typically try to keep that communication very open. It doesn't mean that everybody hears everything, because of course there are many people, but there are no secrets. People can walk into my room and say, "Hey, Robert, tell me a little bit more about investment rounds. And I typically ask them, say, do you want to sit in one of the next investor calls? And then you get an idea what is being discussed. And I think that all the people, whether they are in product or technology or on the customer support or the commercial side, that they like to learn from those type of experiences and say, okay, yeah, what are these people who are leading this company? What do they do in daily life? And I tell them actually, I say, okay, listen, but my biggest, I don't believe in lifetime job employment or jobs for life anymore. So I tell these people, say, listen, you're staying with us as long as we're happy, as long as you're happy. And that happiness is part of how much you learn. And of course, there's also the financial rewards and the time and the stress that it gives you. But also as long as we can keep you excited and challenged with your job. And for me, it's a fact that people will leave at some stage. But it would be the biggest compliment if they would leave to set up their own organization, to set up their own company. But they've been inspired in our organization to actually say, I've learned a lot of stuff during my time at Silverflow. And I had the opportunity to talk to sales, to talk to marketing, to even look into how investment rounds are done, to look at how we build up an HR structure, how we build a certain culture. And I hope that some of them are brave enough to at some moment say, Robert, sorry, I'm going to leave. And then I'll ask them the question, what are you going to do? I would be happy if they say, I'm going to build my organization. I would be sad because they would be leaving, but that would be the biggest compliment I think you can get if they actually take up that challenge. Then.
Oh, that's amazing. I love that as a principle, right? As a founder, that you are like, hey, I love it if my people come and learn and then go and become entrepreneurs themselves because they grew so much and they got inspired and they learned.
Yeah, but that is the biggest compliment, I think.
Yeah.
I don't believe that if you stop educating people, if they're not happy in their position, more money doesn't make them more happy.
Yeah. And I think you said like the key word is like you supporting them in their ambition.
How we keep them passionate.
Yeah.
To show them and to sometimes get them a little bit out of their comfort zone into something new, which they haven't done before. And just say, you can join this project if you want to look into it. And it doesn't mean a job change, but if you're a developer, I don't mind if people sitting in some of the investor calls, just listening in and they're part of it as well. Huh? So it's not that they're on the side of the camera and just listening in. No, I typically say, okay, I've brought one of my developers, senior developers or junior developers. Please introduce yourself. So they actually also get let's say, they're visible in those discussions as well. And they get the visibility as well.
So it's genuinely a very open.
Yeah, but I think you should, because how can you have passion for an organization if you don't know what's going on? Yeah, but it's the other way. If you think there are lots of secrets and things are happening behind your back and you don't know, that doesn't motivate me. It motivates me more. If I know what I'm working on, I'm very passionate about the content. And if you also know what are we doing as a company, where are we trying to aim to, and how does the outside world look at what we're doing, and did you get that feedback and say, hey, I've been talking to investors, listening to podcast marketing. If you include those people in those conversations, they get a very rounded picture of the organization. And that, hopefully, and that's what we hope, is that it gives them more energy and more passion to actually work here with us.
Yeah. I'm loving this conversation. We went very deep into the leadership side of it, but that's what you don't find on Google nor ChatGPT nor like none of those perplexities. Like this is a real life conversation. So moving on, now specific to Silverflow. Before we go in detail on what's your product, what you do, this, the other, can you explain to us, especially for anyone is new to FinTech as such, or newly recent, what is an acquiring processing solution?
Yeah, so it's a complex term. Essentially, we provide the layer, the software layer between banks and the big card networks. Big card networks typically Visa, MasterCard, but of course you also have American Express, and Diners, and Discover, etc. So typically, we make sure that the messages that the bank wants to send to those card networks, that we send them in the right way. Well, the banks don't send those messages themselves. It would typically be you or me as a consumer buying something in, could be a physical store or a web store, and paying with your credit card. This card is pushed into the network at some stage. So for instance, at the point of sale terminal or on the web, and it actually travels all the way to your own bank. your issuing bank, and you had many podcasts before about issuing. But part of it is the acceptance part. And that's typically the retailer goes to their bank and say, I want to have a contract for accepting cards. Well, the bank has a license to accept cards from Visa, MasterCard. And we provide the technology for that bank so they can actually technically send those messages to the bank. And that's an acquirer processing platform in short.
Yes. And then I want to add to that, exactly. In short, maybe 20 years ago, when we thought about acquiring, we thought about cards. That was it. Card payments. But the landscape has changed. Now we have card payments, we have QR payments, we have Google Pay that is still on the rails of cards, but in the eyes of consumers, it's, I want Google Pay, I want Apple Pay. We have online versus 30 years ago, we didn't have. Now that we have like a much more complex ecosystem, it's a very broad question. What does that mean then to merchants?
I think from a merchant perspective, you would like to offer the payment methods that your consumers want to use. And this will be different per country. So in some countries in the Netherlands, for instance, Ideal is a very popular payment method. In Brazil, at this moment you get Pix. It used to be Pagamento Boleto. And in Germany, it would be another payment method. In Belgium, it would be contactless cash. So you have, if you look at on a global scale, you have a few common payment methods. One will be the cards, which is pretty much rolled out globally. There are certain countries who have their own cards. Fair enough. It's quite often a separate domestic network, but it's also based on the cards. And you have bank-to-bank transactions, which also have been there for many years. So pure the bank transfers. This is not something that is 20 years old. It's something that is 56 years old. And I think in all those different elements, there are improvements. So if you're looking at the Apple Wallet or the Google Wallet, what you say correctly, there is a mechanism. The wallet itself is more a cover, but in your wallet, quite often there's a token of your credit card and the credit card rails is used. It could also be a token of your bank account in the future. It's not there at this moment, but it's expected that at some moment you can also do your bank account payments in a similar way with Google and Apple. So it's a new front end, your wallet, based on the existing rails. And the rails itself is improving as well. So if you're looking at, for instance, the account-to-account space, the open banking networks, those are all improvements on the rails itself, making bank transfers simpler, quicker, and cheaper. That's the idea of all these account-to-account transactions and real-time settlement. And you have the tools on top of that, such as the wallet or the QR codes or Ideal, who actually make use of the network. And I think that's, does it eat in on each other? To a degree, yes. To a degree, no. A large part is customer preference. So it's very difficult to convince a customer that prefers to pay in one way to suddenly pay in another way, except if it's a big improvement. In Brazil, of course, you had Pagamento Boleto, which was not, let's say, the most friendly. I'm not sure if you're actually aware of all these payments, but it was not, let's say, the most customer friendly, both for the retailer and the consumer, the most customer friendly payment method. And then something new is introduced like Pix. And within a very short time, it's used very widely. That is because people were not happy with what was there before. If you have more mature markets, then quite often people have already made their choice of selection, which could be credit cards, or it could be an open banking solution or whatever. And then it can be more complex. If people are happy with it, why would you change? And happy is then in the sense of convenience, customer convenience. There could be cost elements, there could be the speed of the transaction, or it could be things like dispute possibilities or fraud solutions or security. So that defines happiness from a consumer perspective. But it's quite difficult to actually change the behavior in a market where consumers are very happy with what they have today. So you have to actually put a layer on top of that to make it more happy. That's where Google or Apple or the QR codes, they bring a certain level of convenience to consumers, which apparently they like enough to move over to them. But it doesn't mean that the rails underneath, so the actual card rails or the banking rails, that they are fully bypassed. It's quite often more slightly different, the cover on top of the same network underneath.
Yeah, and you just described a very complex ecosystem, basically. Specific to Silverflow, what's your role in the ecosystem? Which problem statement are you solving for?
I think that what I explained, we are particularly focused on this card rails, so not on the banking rails. That's a complete different industry. So we're particularly focused on these card rails. And what we've mentioned is that there are many different type of solutions built on top of this card rail. So indeed, a Google Pay, an Apple Pay, QR codes, and there are many other features that you can build essentially on top of the card rails. But of course, the technology should support it. And many of our competitors, they use, let's say old software. Quite often it's been designed in the 70s, 80s, 90s sometimes, but you should look at that type of time frame. And they were not designed with the needs that today's customers have. So yes, they can build something on top of it. They can moderate the product to mimic what they expected, but it's been designed in the core with a different mindset, with the mindset of the 80s. And one of those elements would be, in the 80s, they didn't care about data propositions. It was not a topic that was discussed at that moment. And there was also a technical reason. In the 80s, everything was expensive, whether it was storage or RAM memory or processing power. So these systems have been designed almost from a view, let's use the minimum of the technology that is available. Let's throw away all the data that we don't need. Let's only store the data that we really need, and let's store them as short as possible as we need. And that means that a lot of data in the core of those systems just not get used in the right way. And if you would design a system today, which we did, then of course you look at all those elements. And what can you do with the data? It's not only the data, but also more technology. You can actually support all those new products on top of it to make it simpler, faster, easier, cheaper, etc. To have more efficiency in your QR code on top or in your wallet or whatever. And we help them with tokenization, and we help them with recurring services and upfront prediction of cost elements, those type of things. And they may sound a little bit abstract in this conversation, but these are very important elements for our customers, which are quite often the financial entities who have to work with that and have to provide the end product to the retailers. So for them, it's very important to have all this insight and the tools and the availability to make sure that it works.
Yes. And now that you talk about financial institutions, I work on the issuing side, but it's, in this case, it could be, I'll make the analogy, it's almost the same. Like when we as a financial institution, we're working with a partner, like you, for example, we look at 3, 4, 5, we look at too many, right? And then you are assessing which one you're going to work with. But there's always an element of, we are not the experts in your product. And sometimes it's easy to say, yeah, these two are different because of these. Sometimes it's blurry. It seems like it's the same. And later in time, you're like, oh, they have this feature. I didn't know. That's amazing.
Yeah.
What is that feature for you that you wish that your customers knew about upfront?
I think there are 3 particular areas, I would say, rather than one functionality. So one area that we're completely different in than all our competitors is the element of data. So we've designed our system to be a data system, where essentially all the other systems have been designed to be very efficient with the hardware. So almost the opposite of data systems. And of course, in the years, they've added certain tools to give a little bit of data. So that's one big element that I think our customers should be aware of and say, okay, listen, Silverflow actually is a data system. We can get so much additional data that we couldn't get before. And you get lots of different things with it, but that's a whole different podcast if we can explain what we can do with the data. The other thing is around simplicity. We've designed our system to be very simple to start working with and also to use on a daily basis for your daily operational activity, like the financial reconciliation or boarding new customers or looking at your cost and settlement forecast, etc. And partly we use our own data for making that so simple. But many of our customers think that this type of product is very complex. So what we essentially tell them is, no, it's not very complex. You don't need 2.5 years to go live. Our quickest customers go live in 6 weeks. And you don't need to have 200 people working on your dispute team because we've automated 70% of them. So the other message is, it's actually simpler than you think it might be based on talking to the other companies. And the third one is, of course, around innovation of products. We innovate very quick, and we can do that because we've got a very modern stack, where most of the competitors have a very complex stack, which is decades old, and therefore they don't innovate that quickly. So innovation can happen quickly as well. So I think those are 3 things. You ask for one, which is around data, simplicity, and speed of innovation.
Yeah. And I like that, the speed of innovation, because sometimes you are like, oh, it could be great if we do this. And then you're like, oh, but that means a change request and it's going to take forever.
Exactly.
working with a
And people
partner,
working
right?
with payment, very used to that. So yes, you want something new, it's possible. And you're going to talk to your technical provider and you know that they probably say, we can help you with it, but it's going to cost this amount of money and it's going to take a lot of time. That's the typical answer you will get. Well, that is typically what we do not give, because either we already have the functionality, and if we don't have it, typically, and I have to say that, of course, within a little bit boundaries of what is realistic, but typically we have a very quick development cycle. So we're not talking about years with huge budgets, but quite often, if it makes sense, yeah, we can have new functionality up and running in a couple of weeks or a couple of months max.
Yeah. And then what could be the biggest challenges that your customers face when working with you?
I think that it depends a bit on the type of customer, but of course they have to work in a slightly new way. And that's quite often what they're not used to. They're used to their existing system and they know the good and the bad things about the system. And now they have to learn a new system. And of course, we've made our system be very simple. That could mean that suddenly our customers have too many staff, for instance. That could be a challenge for making a decision. Also, other type of customers who are new to acquiring, quite often they are used to other products before. And suddenly they become an acquirer themselves. So they get their own license and use our technology. And that means they have to do more than what they used to do before. Because before, they're relying on an external partner and who charge a lot of money for not doing a lot. And now they suddenly have to do it themselves, which makes it, from a financial point of view, much more interesting. But they have more responsibility. So they also have to get used to, let's say, slightly more responsibility if you're an acquirer yourself compared to working with an external acquirer.
Definitely. Yes. And yeah, I can just imagine that it's like, whoa, now it's like acquiring. Whenever we at work, we say, oh yeah, but that's acquiring. We say, oh, but that's a total new world. Because
It
it
actually
is.
is different. It actually is different. So issuing is, from my point of view, considerably simpler than acquiring. But that's my opinion.
I think they are different. But then I think, like, talking about differences, the one thing that is in common that we cannot skip in this podcast is fraud. So fraud is on the rise. How do we manage it better?
I think we look at fraud from the acceptance side, and you can look at different type of patterns when looking at the transactions. And that is what most of these fraud solutions, they look at certain type of patterns. And our view is that if you have more data, you have more data to look into. And you can create better insight. And there are lots of tools who, at this moment, they don't get access to all the data. They have access to a subset of the data. They don't have access to all the data because the data simply is not passed on. So what our role in it is, we are not a fraud provider ourselves, because we know there are very good companies who make fantastic fraud tools themselves already. So we prefer to partner with those because we like to partner with those innovative companies. What we can help them is that we can provide them with additional sets of data, which they would normally not get. And how does it come that they normally would get it? Because those old platforms, they have not been designed for passing through that data. So the data is somewhere, but the platforms have not been designed for passing that on. And we can do that. So that's how we enhance these companies to improve their fraud models. Another element, of course, of fraud is more in the tokenization space. But then you're more looking at using stolen cars and cars for the same time. So we have lots of those tools as well. But in most cases, people look at, let's say, the actual fraud solutions. How do you make sure that they're improving? And a very important part is this set of additional data.
Yeah. And I think it's like spot on. Because, well, fraud is on the rise, but then data is like better analysis of data and then more data such that then we can train the models better and then correlate each other. Yeah. That's what's going to help us as an industry.
Yeah. And there's another element. So we know that in many markets, there are local companies who do the same as we do, but then in their local markets. If you're quite often, if you're a local player, from a size perspective, you're not so big. You have a domestic view, but not the global international view. And you also don't have the budgets to actually improve your system. So the card networks themselves, they of course come also with a lot of tools to combat frauds.
Yeah.
But only if you implement them, if they're implemented at the acquired processor level, does it help in that particular market. So what you see quite often, that the fraud goes to those markets, it floods to those markets where fraud control is the weakest, I would say. And yes, the tools are quite often available from external providers, from the card networks themselves, from other providers that you can work with. But if they're not implemented, because you don't have the budget to upgrade your system, or because your system is essentially outdated, then that is the cause that you might see a lot of fraud. And that will be on the acquirer side, but it passes on to the issuer. If an issuer has also older systems, for instance, and both the acquirer and issuer in that same situation of having older systems with poor data access, that's how you can see that the fraud is rising. And my advice would be is look both on the acquiring and on the issuing side, that you look at modern systems who give you the actual insight, to give you actual tools that are brought either from the card networks or from external tools to actually have a good play. And I think that is a revolution that will happen in the course of the next 5 years, that across the globe, many acquirers and issuers, even if it will be purely for that reason, will have to move on to a more modern system, because otherwise they will be the weakest link in the system, and that's where all the fraud will go to.
And I think that's such a powerful insight, even for the podcast as such, that we're like, hey, fraud is on the rise, but then probably the way that we will tackle that is when issuers and acquirers, we move into new technology, not legacy technologies like the current ones, and then start leveraging.
We actually benchmark that as well. We have reports here in the office where we look at the different issuers, and even on card bin level, where we can see the differences in fraud and conversion, etc. So we can more or less, based on the fraud statistics that we see and the refusal rates, test the age of the issuer platform and quite often which issuer platform it is, even to go in more detail. And that's of course very powerful if you can extract that from the data that you have, that you say, this particular issuer in that particular region, they don't have their fraud settings under control.
Oh, that's awesome. It's been a fascinating conversation. I'll have one more question for you that it's one of my favorite questions that I ask everyone. That is, if you were to change one thing, it's only one thing in the industry that can have the most impact to customers, colleagues, and shareholders, what would that be?
One thing, I would say global regulation. Making it
global regulation.
I'm not against global regulation or a more aligned regulation, I would say, not one regulation for the globe, but at this moment, and this applies more to our customers, if you want to build a global business, you have to work with so many different regulators across the globe. And our model is not suffering from that, but our customers are suffering from that. And it essentially slows down innovation. It increases the cost of doing any form of innovation. And the combination of, let's say, complex regulation, high cost involved, essentially it slows down innovation. And it's in the benefit for the companies who already were regulated, but it's not in the benefit of the companies who want to innovate in those markets. And I'm not against regulation, so that's the wrong thing. I'm very pro proper regulation, but I think it could be made much simpler so that you actually drive innovation.
I love that. That's a key message. Thank you, Robert. It's been a pleasure having you in the show. Thank you so much. And everyone, see you next week. Ciao,
Thank you so much, Monica, as well.
Thank you.